Welcome to Raw and Refined, the Gentleman's Hour, where we're going to have conversation with middle-aged black men about what's going on. We welcome you to listen, comment, and like, and hopefully encourage others to join for future conversations as well. We always like to start off with a toast, and with that toast, it's because we are gentlemen and we do it raw and refined. Rich, what we got today?
Thanks, John. Today, we got I thought, a pretty interesting topic, John Henryism, the high cost of perseverance. Today, I decided to go with something newer for me, but I think it's quite good. I've learned recently that I like rise, So my man, Russ Sko, that's all I can say, has really been pushing the brother in the direction of different bourbons and whiskeys. So this one is actually a gift from Sko, but it's a Chattanooga whiskey. It's a straight rye malt whiskey made in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's got a great mouth feel. It's got a hint of sweet in there, which of course I like. Just really, really nice. We're doing whiskeys today as we roll through this topic, John Henryism. So welcome listeners, welcome people out there. It's great to have you with us today. We're gonna jump into this topic, John Henryism. What is John Henryism? Who is John Henry? Just real briefly, there's a lot of different there's books, there's songs, folklore about this brother named John Henry, who was, depending on whose information you're looking at, not quite sure where he was born, but sounds like he may have been born somewhere in West Virginia. In some accounts, he was a former slave. In other accounts, he was a free man. And in all accounts, he was an incredibly strong, big, physical, powerful brother. And ultimately, what his story kind of centers on is when the railroads were being expanded across the nation and they would have to cut through mountains and cut through rock to make tunnels and do all of that. He was working a job where he was one of the people. I think they were called like steel drivers. They basically drilled into the bedrock. They would punch holes in they would have a metal strike and a hammer. They would chisel in essentially holes into the rock, and then they would put gunpowder or dynamite or whatever, blast the rock out. Around 1870s, they were introducing these mechanical steam drillers, is what they called them. And they were saying that the mechanical steam driller machines could actually do the work faster than humans. The story is that he essentially competed with one of these machines, and he drilled 14 feet in the time that the machine was only able to drill about 9 feet. So he beat the machine, and then he died from exhaustion. And so that's essentially the basis of the legend of John Henry. One of the interesting things I think is that it kind of symbolizes, that thing that we've kind of talked about in the past, that notion that we have to do three times the work as our white counterparts to be recognized or something like that. And that so many of us are willing to push ourselves beyond quote unquote normal human limits to try to achieve. This story, that basic story, is what's bringing us together today. And so we think it's a very relevant topic, one worthy of discussion. And like I said, it's potentially a very deep topic, which I thought was worthy of a nice beverage. And John and Greg, since you all gave me such a hard time in our last episode about the container in which I have my beverage in, I have a far more appropriate glass for, a short glass for a nice whiskey today.
Good
That
for
I
you.
appreciate, my brother, because as I mentioned, gentlemen don't drink out of just some plastic cup. We gonna have a refined and raw beverage. We gonna have it the right way. So it's
Brother,
very
my
good to
champagne
see
was in a
that.
Yeti. My champagne was in a Yeti. It was not in a plastic cup. All right.
The
It
violation
was in a it
still.
was a very bougified drink container. All right. It was not appropriate for
Oh
champagne,
man,
maybe, but it definitely wasn't a plastic cup.
does it? All right, I give you that.
Today we're going to be looking at this notion of John Henryism, this high cost of perseverance from two perspectives, both psychological and personal perspectives. We're going to start off jumping into this with the psychological perspective, understanding John Henryism, and GK is going to kick us off.
Yeah, so I guess I should start with my drink too. So I don't do too much brown liquor, Holloway, but thanks to you and the whiskey, I'm going to do what is called grappa alla caruba, and that's my best Italian, long and short of it. It's a brandy kind of whiskey thing from Italy, and it's the closest that I can get to bourbon or whiskey, but they're all in the same family. Americans, we have the corner sort of on lock on bourbon and whiskey, but they make some good stuff in other places, and this is sort of in that family. So big ups as the pop.
There you go. There you go.
And the poor. All right. So John Henry, man, what an interesting thing. So I just can remember John Henry, the song we used to sing, right? Just sort of I can't remember the words, but John Henry, as you mentioned at the top, Holloway, just being a man of strength that could outwork the machine. But more recently, people are starting to examine the notion of John Henry, particularly for Black men, as a real thing and a real person, and how we might learn from, John Henryism, which, as a whole, as I've learned now, as a whole area of study. One of the sort of brilliant people who really forced us to think about John Henryism as an epidemiologist named Sherman James. He was at Duke. He was a professor emeritus at Duke, and he did a whole lot of study on it from a psychological and physiological perspective. And so just fascinated by, he sort of developed these 12 item scale to measure John Henryism. So it calls you to ask questions like, when things don't go the way I want, that just makes me work even harder, or questions like, it's not always easy, but I usually find a way to do the things I really need to get done. And so the more you answer those questions and those statements, you put yourself on the higher John Henryism scale, as Dr. James suggests. So, but I think the main point is that there are real physiological and psychological impacts on adopting sort of a John Henry approach, this notion of working oneself to death, or at least working oneself to a place where you aren't healthy. And so I think as we in this country are more clear about the impacts of mental health, John Henryism is starting to move more into the mainstream of society, and people are starting to think about it, even without calling it sort of this clinical John Henryism thing. But we understand in a country like the US, where stress is rampant because we work so hard, John Henryism is a real thing that impacts everybody. But we are becoming clearer today that Black Americans, Black men in particular, have a higher propensity from suffering from these types of issues related to basically working so hard and not taking care of one's chicken, as Marshawn Lynch would say, your brain and your health and your mental health. So that's kind of a thumbnail about what John Henryism is. And I think, what triggered our conversation around it was really sort of the challenges I think that we all have. Certainly the three of us have talked about dealing with the stress of work and family and society that does things so rushed. And so we began to talk about it, saw some cool videos and people were like breaking it down, but strikes me as a really important subject.
Yeah, GK, it's a great segue into what we're talking about. And I'm going to give a little bit more conversation about Dr. Sherman James and how he coined this phrase, John Henryism, just honestly, which I didn't know has been around since the 1970s. The interesting part about it, though, with his research is that he was researching, the impact of health and wellness on blacks and whites in North Carolina. So I appreciate all that was brought up about John Henryism so far. We're going to talk a little bit more about that and Dr. Sherman James as well. What I've come to find out through researching this conversation and topic of John Henryism is that Dr. Sherman James was the one that actually coined the phrase John Henryism. And this phrase has been around since the 1970s, which is something that I was not aware of. What he did was he actually did a lot of research looking at the health and wellness of blacks and whites in North Carolina. Through his research, he came across this retired farmer sharecropper by the name of John Henry Martin. And that's actually where he termed or coined the term John Henryism. The folklore of John Henry just so happens that it fits in with our conversation today, but through his research, he actually coined it based on this sharecropper and farmer. So just an interesting point there, because he also speaks of the folklore of John Henry and how he was able to do what he did as the still driving man and his accomplishments, and how it shows that as black men, we still have this ideal or thought or whatever that's instilled in us that we've got to work harder to even be recognized. So, Rich, you mentioned about 3 times as much, some might say even 10 times as much, in order to just try to get to the level of those that don't look like us and their level of status as well. So through his research, he was able to find out that there were health conditions that were developing because of all of this external pressure, societal or financial, that was being placed on especially African Americans, and that being African American males as well. And the biggest thing he noticed was cardiovascular effects and blood pressure being a main one of that. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about all of that as well. But just to continue our introduction of how we got to this John Henryism.
Thanks, John. That was really interesting. I hadn't heard about what was his name? John Henry
Martin.
Martin.
Martin. Yeah, John Henry Martin. That's a dope twist on it. So, I think, like you said, as we continue to try and connect these notions of John Henryism to where we are today, 2025. And of course, our primary, I guess, target audience is Black men, that are, looking and are probably around our age. What does this mean for us and Black men like us, and this notion of, of working tirelessly to prove themselves, careers and in life and in education and politics, all of these different places and spaces. And I think it does kind of, we can all speak to having heard or been in conversations or when we were young, listening to our parents or other elders talking about, how we've got to do more, work harder, be better than our counterparts. But rarely do we ever hear what's the consequences of living an entire life that way. I think as when we're young, we naturally compartmentalize things, and frankly, we don't see life as being as long as for most of us, hopefully it is, right? Think back to when you were 18, what was your concept of a long life, right? Compared to someone who's 50 or 60, that what kind of matters and the perspectives we should have. But when you're young, you're not thinking about working hard for 50 years. But now that you're in your 50s, how much of your life of your 50, I'm 56, right? Is that right? Or will I be 56? Well, yeah, see, there you go. So much of these 56 years have been spent working hard compared to some white 56-year-olds. I don't know how many of them have had to work as hard as I've worked, and comparatively or relatively speaking, in some respects, I haven't worked nearly as hard as some other Black men. Right. And just because my work hasn't been necessarily physical in nature, a lot
Yep.
of my life, my work has been mental or intellectual. Not that that isn't difficult or challenging. And it can lead to breaking your body down in other ways, right? Because stress is stress, and stress kills, whether you're carrying stuff with your mind or carrying stuff with your body.
Yep.
So I think, we've seen examples in our respective careers of Black men who it may not appear that they worked themselves to death because they didn't die in the manner that John Henry did in the folklore, right? He beat the machine and then later died from exhaustion. So there was a clear path, a clear connection
Mm.
to his efforts to do more than the machine. You can see a direct line to the damage it did to him. But if we think about the long-term effects of stress, we think about the long-term effects of being a Black man in America and what that can do to you physically and emotionally if you are not guarding yourself against it,
Yep. Yep.
and trying to mitigate it. So I think we've all seen, elders that, we've seen cats just walking around. John, perfect example for me when you were last in Chicago, you came in, I came over there to your mom's to check you out. And on my way over there, I saw this old head walking down the street. And when I say that, you too, and pretty much all of our listeners know what I mean. An old head was walking down the street, and you could tell that he's lived a rough life, but he was still walking like life ain't beat him all the way down. But you could see that it has been beating on him. You know what I mean? So,
Yep.
I mean, there are a million examples that we can see every day in and around the neighborhoods of just how life has beat people down. We don't
Mhm.
know always their particular circumstances and how much of it is about them trying to push through, how much of is it about them trying to persevere, and how much that has contributed, you know. But I know we can find a million examples of that too.
You know, it's interesting. One point I would emphasize that Dr. James has made around John Henryism is that he argues that it is a way in which some Black Americans respond to discrimination. He argues that structural racism is a key factor in John Henryism, and that the response that those who have John Henryism engage in is thinking that they can somehow overcome the effects of structural racism, the effects of racism, simply by working harder and working longer. So it's an interesting way of thinking about it's a way of, according to James, and I think he's right, it's a way of responding and reacting to racism as opposed to just being a thing that exists on its own while other groups of people have it. He's being pretty clear that there are particular aspects of racism and structural racism that forces some Black men to engage in behavior that they think is kind of mitigate against the discrimination. And I think he argues that that's not as easy as people like to think. It isn't. The answer isn't simply to work harder, right? There are other kinds of things that we need to be doing to make sure that we don't become John Henry, right?
We're on the precipice of the opportune social experiment, right? To really delve into this because right now we're seeing all of the levers of structural racism turned up and amplified in just over the last few weeks. And so, you know, we'll see that there will be those who will respond in that manner because I think that's part of our training. It has been, you know, some of it is a necessary survival mechanism, but not all of it, right? You can go too far and start doing damage as opposed to just trying to save yourself.
And the interesting part for me in all of this is how, through the research and studies, to be able to show this connection with other health related issues. So the stressors are there, and it does not only psychologically, but physically affects us as well. And one of the outcomes was that of high blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
For us, we've all, been able to reach certain levels within our careers. And, we are blessed to be able to say that we are in our positions that we are in, but that wasn't given to us. That wasn't just because, our father's name was such and such or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We've had to work to get to where we are at a much higher pace in order to try to get there and then maintain or justify why we are in the positions that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll speak personally, I have high blood pressure
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a young man. I'm not that overweight, I'm active, and things of that nature. But then you're wondering, well, why? And part of that you think is maybe it's just the genetics of things that I'm going to develop high blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not really. I've got some other colleagues and close friends that are our same age doing similar work that also have high blood pressure, as black men and things. And it's like, well, wait a minute. There's got to be something more to this.
Yeah.
And learning about John Henryism now helps me understand how the external forces truly can impact our physical nature of things as well. So this is something that I think is highly important for us. Glad that we're having this conversation as well. And just to let you know, I didn't get a chance to say, but my choice of beverage for this evening was old school. I went back to old school Jack and looked at a little winter Jack at that because it had a little cider in it. So I figured, hey, it's winter time. Let me go there with the little, and it's a Coke Zero actually. to help add a little flavor to that as well.
A
So a
jacket
toast
coat
to my
zero.
brothers. Right.
All right. So I want to jump in, John, real quick on what you were talking about because I saw something on TV yesterday that this made me think about. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on his name. The Hammer, the brother, the actor from back in the
Fred
day.
Williams.
There you go, Fred Williamson. He was on the WGN Morning News yesterday. The brother's like 89, something like that, looking good still. And he talked about a couple of things that made me think. And he said one of the things he talked about was that he said that as he said, y'all might have noticed I'm a black man, right? And he said, and I learned early in life to to go where I'm appreciated. So I spent a lot of time in Europe because that he said they look at us differently. They treat us
Mm-hmm.
differently over there compared to America. And then at another point, he said the reason that he looks so good is because he lives a stress-free life. He said, the reason I look like this is because there's no stress on me. There's no stress in me. He said, and so it's not attacking me like it does most people.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that just made me think about that when what you were talking about, Johnny, because that's the reality, right? This, as a doctor, you know this, but most of us, I think, can feel it on some levels, right? As our stress levels, as they rise, we can feel physical
yeah,
manifestations of it in different ways. I think one of the challenges that a lot of people have to learn is learning their triggers, their stress triggers, those things that can elevate their stress. But some of the stress is built in. When you talk about things like structural racism, when you talk about the fact that most of us have to work, right? We have to have jobs
Mm-hmm.
because we're not independently wealthy. So to support our families, we have to go places and we often have to work with people who create stress. And in a lot of cases, intentionally create stress, right? You talked about workplaces. There are a lot of unfortunately evil people out there who have power
Mm-hmm.
over others on a daily basis and get to flex and use that power to make the people that they work with or that work for them, work under them, to make their lives worse. So all of those things are naturally going to increase the stress. So for me personally, we're going to kind of move on to kind of the personal experience part. We talked through some of the psychological. I'm going to talk a little bit about a time when working hard came at the expense of my mental or physical health.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I'm one of the most basic examples I can go back to was when I was in college. An easy example of pushing myself beyond, when I should have, that was healthy for me mentally or physically. I can remember finals week my freshman year and staying up for basically that entire week, taking no dose, drinking what was that stuff called? Jolt Cola. Right, y'all remember Jolt Cola? It said,
Yep.
yeah.
it said
Jolt.
twice the caffeine. Yeah, Jolt
Right.
Cola. It said twice the caffeine and all the sugar you'll need was
Right.
on the was on.
Jolt. Oh my God. Yes.
Right.
I was drinking Jolt Colas and popping no dos, so much so that towards the end of that week, my body said, "No, you can't have any more." And no
Mm-hmm.
matter what I tried to do, this no dose would not go down. It was staying on my tongue. I was drinking whole cans of pop, and the no dose, my body was like, "You can't have any more. You just." And then I ended up sleeping for like 2.5 days after finals were over. But that kind of thing we don't think about. When we're young, we do all kinds of stupid stuff like that. But as we age and progress, I can think about many times when I was a practicing trial lawyer and, you know, again, not getting the right amount of sleep because I'm working on something that, has a deadline or this or that. And it might have been that I could have done a better job planning, or it also might have been that this was more work than I should have been taking on at that particular time. But, it needed to get done, or there was a deadline, or whatever the case may be. So a number of, those types of things happen regularly, that we don't even really think about. It's just oh well, we got to do it, or it's got to get done, or there's this timeline. So those kind of instances jump out. I don't necessarily have a lot of specific instances of where I know I pushed myself too far and I had some, say, physical breakdown, other than as I think about it, when before I really understood what sciatica was, that I had sciatica, but it wasn't really just pushing myself in a work context. I was playing in basketball league as at the time, and as I was physically getting worse because I didn't know what sciatica was and it was flaring up at the time. I'm out there playing, but I'm still, this is the time when I'm still in my 30s and I'm still, fit and strong, or think I am, and so I'm out there doing this until literally one day I try to get out of bed in the morning and I fall to the floor because I can't stand up. right? So my wife
Okay.
goes and gets the office chair from my office, rolls it in there, and I'll pull myself up on the chair. Go to the doctor and, do the physical therapy, and I'm walking with a cane for a while and all of that. And, until I get my strength back. So, and that was over a protracted period of time, where it was like probably 3 weeks earlier when this thing first started happening, I should have been asking questions about it. But, I'm young and I still think I'm immortal at that point. So I guess I do have a personal example.
I think you got more than you realize.
Yeah.
Right.
I think about when I was a young organizer, and just it was nonstop all the time, and you were going to different places all the time. But the thing that really sticks out for me is sort of for me, it's more of an emotional thing, and how it shows up, has shown up, and sometimes now even shows up in my body, if you will. When you care so much and you're so intensely focused on something, you have things like short fuses, right? You find that your heart races, right? So there are mental and physical reactions that you have to overdoing it. And for me, physically, it showed up and it was kind of a life changing thing. I just started having heart palpitations, just like, I can't really, like, I would get so agitated, so mad, because I wanted to be right. I wanted to do right. I was kind of a hothead. And so when I saw injustice or people being treated poorly or like felt disrespected, had to react in an angry sort of way. And it just wound up showing up physically. And so I literally had to change. And so sometimes people will have said over the years, like, you seem so calm under pressure now. Well, the truth is, and this is another aspect of John Henryism, is that I've gotten better at hiding it. I don't know that I've gotten better at managing it, but I haven't eliminated it, right? I don't like fly off, or I don't cuss at people and yell. I don't really do that too often. But I still feel the pressure and the stress in my body, and that there's a way in which trying to win and be on top of things and like giving it your all sort of reinforces that. So now I try not to do that. But obviously, as you mentioned earlier, this past month or so has been a new challenge in figuring out how to navigate all of the pressure and stress of wanting to win and caring so much that it impacts you both mentally and physically.
So
I
Greg,
get you guys.
answer this question real quick, Greg. When has perseverance been both a strength and a burden?
Ooh, well, I think it happens I would say all the time. I think when I'm in the midst, like one of my problems has been that because I'm an empath by nature, right? So when I see something that I don't like or some kind of injustice, that I kind of take it on as my own. But I think for some people that comes across as a kind of a okay, he's a nice, humane person, right? So in that sense, I think people are more open to what I have to say and think and so forth. So in that sense, it's a positive, but it has also prevented me from like getting the type of rest that I needed, focused on the type of personal, as we call it, ecology that I've needed. Like, dude, go take some time off, go take a vacation, which I should be able to do at this stage. But it has, not being focused enough on those things really has at various times taken a toll. And so again, it's a work in progress, and I'm still not great at it. And it comes and it goes, but ultimately, I found that coping with it means just resting more. And what I mean resting, not just simply like laying around sleep, but like not being so intense and not being so focused, because you can only do what you can do at a particular time. And then also organizationally sharing the burden with other people. You couldn't possibly do it all by yourself. And so I'm pretty lucky at work that I have some amazing people who are helping carry burdens.
Yeah, I'd have to say, bruh, that this the raw and refined is that and unfortunately we live this shit every day.
Yeah.
Okay, as a physician in North Carolina, a black male internal medicine physician, which there are not many of us here, believe me, bros, I feel that pressure, that desire, though, to want to help. And I have to catch myself because I always feel like I need to be able to try to help. And I can't. There's only me, but I deal with it daily because I see people, I see patients daily, and I'm with an organization that I feel recognizes that, but yet and still, I'm not sure if we're doing as much as we can
Yeah.
to help lessen the burden and stress that we do feel or that I feel as a primary care physician in North Carolina. And I have a diverse population of folks that I take care of. It's still a matter of trying to get the message across as to why health and wellness is important. What can we do to help that? And then trying to live what I'm also advising folks. So you said it as well, Greg, that, it's finding that time to rest. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not always necessarily physical rest, but it's mental and emotional rest as
Mm-hmm.
well. And thankfully, I've got family, I've got friends, I've got coworkers that truly, I think, help me with that as well. And I lean on all of that in order to try to get myself okay,
Mm-hmm.
to be better, and ready the next day. Because as we said earlier, we've got to be even better than folks who are, quote, regular in what they do, to just be understood and acknowledged as to what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that pressure's there, so we've got to make sure that we are keeping this conversation going with each other, letting each other have their moment where they are feeling it and just let it go, let it be, let them have that moment, but yet be able to be there to help be a relaxing force for them as well, because it's important for us to have the conversation. Not we go too long where us as black men, especially, we're not talking about what's going on with us. That goes back to this concept of John Henryism, and that's where the health issues come in, the palpitations, the headaches, the fatigue, and people coming to a doctor trying to figure out, well, what's physically wrong with me, when we're trying to say, not all of this is truly physical. This is life around you that's going on. So how can we deal with that? And that's the hard part, because a lot of folks, and you said it, Rich, got to work. You got to live. You got to survive. You got to be able to take care of your family. So how do I deal with this that I know is putting all of this on me as well?
Say, Doc,
Um,
what's going on? Life is coming out your pores. That's what's going
right,
on.
right, exactly,
Basically, what's
exactly,
this is
Life
the
is life.
physical
exactly.
manifestation of life.
Yep.
You know.
Life is life. And the other thing, the sources, there's a way in which we talk about, the work aspect of it, which is important. But there's also the other fact, I live on the south side of Chicago, right? And
Mhm.
I have to say, sometimes leaving the house alone is a level of stress that's hard to convey to people. And I used to joke that I don't really always remember how stressful it is to live in Chicago, particularly on the south side of Chicago, until I leave the south side of Chicago. And
Yeah.
it's like a weight that's lifted off of you. And so where we
Yeah.
live, and like I even get in the diet, and even we have our moderate drinking, but like things like that, right? Too much of it, like how are all of those things sort of work together to make it to harm us, and these some of this stuff is just coping mechanisms with all of the stress and trauma.
Greg, you just said something. I just have to jump in on you because it made me thinking about it. This was years ago, but we go to South Africa, and we're touring this area that was pretty destitute, right? We go into this little store,
Hmm.
and the store had bars. The guy that was, where the cashier was, there were
Mhm.
bars, but there was no bulletproof glass
Mhm.
or anything like that. And I kind of chuckled because I was like, oh, this is so quaint. But that's because they don't have a
Right,
gun problem. They don't have the gun problems that we have
right.
in Chicago. And just, like you said, that underlying stress of just part of everyday life and living is a reality that you could get shot. right?
Yep.
In certain neighborhoods, so that adds a level of stress. And I think
Mm,
there are some parallels, there are some differences where I'm at. I'm an hour and a half away from Chicago because of traffic, but I'm a world away. I live in the red part of the state. Well, actually, most of the state is actually the red part of the state when you look at it geographically, but not necessarily numbers wise. But where we're at is very much orange. It's very orange where I'm at. And so there's a different type of stress associated with that. The stress of daily life, once again, it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. Some of it we can control, some of it we can't necessarily control. But when does hard work become unhealthy? Where's that point? How do we figure out when it becomes unhealthy? We know we got to do some hard work, right? But when does it become unhealthy?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in on that one Rich. And I'll say, I'm gonna give a little commercial here. If you want to get a visual of kind of what we're talking about, I just went and saw Captain America: Brave New World,
mm,
Hmm.
and I will be honest, man, a lot of this conversation you can visually see through that movie.
mm.
So
Yeah.
if you haven't, I would
Yeah. I did
suggest
check it out.
I
see
have
that and
it's on my list.
see how a lot of what we're talking about is expressed through him, Sam Wilson,
Oh,
as Captain
oh, let me
America.
throw another layer on there for you, right? Because this
Mm-hmm.
happened when we went to go see it, right? We go see it. My wife and I go to see it, and we're sitting in the next to last row, IMAX, right? Should have got tickets
Mm-hmm.
in the last row, and that would have, fixed this problem. But three dudes come sit behind us, right? And as
Mm-hmm.
they're coming to sit in, they're bumping the seat and stuff like that. And so then I asked the cats to, stop bumping the seats. And one of them
Mm-hmm.
says, you should have went and got you a private screening. So when you're
Wow.
talking about the stresses of life, so I stand up, I turn around, and I start visually thinking about which one I'm gonna leap over to seat at first. But then I'm thinking, the missus is here, and my
Yeah.
baby,
Mm-hmm.
my baby is ride or die. So
Uh-huh.
if I go over the seat, she's coming over the seat with me, and
Uh-huh.
so I instead go get the managers, and they get put out. And this is even before the movie even started. This is
Wow.
during
Wow.
the previews. So
Wow.
they didn't even get to see the whole previews. They are up out of there. But
Wow.
this is an example. And so I don't know what their true ethnicity or nationality is. They were definitely foreigners who were here under who knows what circumstances. But what often
Mm-hmm.
happens, America teaches people that they can come over here and they can disrespect black folks because
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing to do, right? So that's just another one of those stresses of life that can add to this. So, but yeah, I just want, I thought better of going physical with
Good.
it and went and
Uh-huh.
Good.
got the management and they
Yep.
put them people out. But
Good.
that's just another. But yeah, it's Captain America. I'm sitting up there and then I watched the whole movie and I'm like, see, this is exactly the kind of mess I'm talking about. Yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
check it out. It was good.
Exactly.
Sam,
Man.
like you said, Sam lived through. I mean, it was a whole
Yes.
movie of that, and
Yes.
especially considering the timing of everything.
Yeah.
Yes,
Hmm.
yes,
On it.
yes. So, but to get back to your question though, Rick, so physically, it's a lot of what we've already kind of talked about. It's the fatigue, it's the heaviness that people feel, it's the palpitations that come about for no reason. It's the headaches, it's the lack of sleep. And then we see it when you come into the office as to blood pressure is not well controlled, the blood sugars are not well controlled, the cholesterol levels are
It's the
not well controlled
It's the unhealthy
because
eating habits.
it's the
The people that
unhealthy
they
eating.
eating
Right,
out of it's the eating out of stress. It's the
Yeah.
I'm
right.
worried about this, I'm worried about that, and so I eat three times what I would eat because for some reason while I'm eating, I'm not feeling the
Not
stress.
feeling the stress. Exactly. It's
Hmm.
the smoking, it's the
Hmm.
drinking, it's all of that that comes about. And that's what we will start to feel physically is trying to find an answer. So that's where we talked about earlier. This light coming out your pores. That's what's going on with you. But for a lot of people, they don't grasp that. So you're trying to figure out, okay, well, is this, is that, whatever, when it's like, hey, get
It's
back
the
to
color
eating right.
purple. Until you do right by me,
And right.
everything you do is gonna fail. And the until you do right by me is
Right.
your body talking to you.
Right.
Until you do right by me, everything is
Right.
gonna fail. You got to
Right.
start taking care of you to get
Right.
at the root of these problems.
That's it
Hmm.
exactly. That's it exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's funny when you start to think about the ways in which stress and its impact on you physically. For me, it's mental. It all for me. It always starts with something mental. I can't imagine. I love to run, and that's one of the things that helps me. And again, one of
Hmm.
those things you can literally feel the weight lifted off of you after because my thing is to take too many things on mentally, and so I'm learning that the less I take on mentally, the better I feel physically. And so that's kind of the strategy that I've started to take. Not always
Hmm.
successful at it. So it is a practice.
Right. Right.
But these things, the interplay of both is really fascinating to me. It's not either or. They really do work hand in hand.
Yep,
Right.
that word balance, 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 balance keeps rearing its head. Everything is about balance and trying to
Right.
find it.
And up to us, brothers, to hold each other accountable to that as well. So, I appreciate it when we talk about things as relates to health and wellness because we actually have to help each other be accountable to our actions as well. So if I'm sending out a hey, make sure you guys are going for a walk for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or, doing whatever you can to help just relieve whatever that stress or pressure that you've been feeling, we've got to do that because we got to help each other know that, hey, don't forget, you need this as much as I need this as well. And by me telling you helps me say, well, dang, I need that too. So holding us accountable to what that looks like is necessary. Doing things that I've said before is to help your mind not go through what's been going through the day. You
Hmm.
need a moments when you can have that
Yeah.
because that's the balance. If your mind is always on 10, you're never going to be able to get that. So you need to do something that takes your mind off of that. And for you, Greg, it's the running where you can just be out there and just run, and let that energy out in some form or fashion. For me, it might be my martial arts where I might physically let that energy out in some way, but then my mind is on that and
Yeah.
not everything else that's been going on through the day.
Yeah.
So just encouraging everybody, we need that time. We need those moments.
Yeah. I mean, I think to this notion of overwork, it's funny. Sometimes you can overwork yourself to the point where you become stuck or paralyzed. And
Mm,
that's one of the other things that we have to guard against is this notion that you mentioned, Holloway, around balance. Because you
mm-hmm,
can overwork yourself so much to the point where you fatigue yourself mentally and physically,
mm-hmm.
and you can't move. You can't move, and you get stuck. That's the other game. The pursuit of balance is difficult, but we all have to engage in it.
I say to
Yeah.
some folks that we want to try to get to the point of retirement. So when I'm dealing with you from a physical, mental standpoint, we're doing things, we're trying to keep the body, well. But I say, look, we're trying to get to a point where you can enjoy life. We don't want you to retire and then you die. That's John Henry right there, right? You done worked
Hmm.
yourself to the point of now exhaustion and you finally completed the effort and now you're dying. It's like, that's not what I think life is supposed to be about.
Yeah.
So I encourage my folks, and I call my patients my folks, that we've got to do what we can to stay healthy so that when we get to that point, you are enjoying the rest of whatever life looks like for you as well. And, I know it's hard to get that work in, get that exercise rather in, get that moments where you can go vacationing and free your mind, but if we've at least gotten to that point, well, now you have that opportunity to do all these things that we've been wanting you to do. And it's still not too late. We just sometimes have to work towards at least getting there. Now I need you to really now put that effort in into taking care of you.
It's it's interesting because on some levels I say it's not that hard, but you all know me and you know how I think sometimes, and I can be a little bit too abrasive in some moments because hey, there are really four components to what we're talking about here, right? There's your spiritual, there's your physical, there's your emotional, and there's your mental, right? So those are the four components. All four of them need to be addressed. All four of them need care, and so yeah, you got your going to the gym is important or exercising in some capacity is important, I should say. I think a lot of times people don't consider all four components of
Hmm.
your being and how you've got to address all four parts of you, I think, to help get into a better place. So, but I say it's not hard. It is hard. It's each type of thing that you address can be challenging, it can be difficult, but ultimately the reason I say it's not hard is because everything we do is a choice. And so when you choose to do or you choose not to do, you're choosing the consequences of those choices as well.
Right.
A lot of times those choices are unconscious, but they're still being made or not being made. And so, your personality plays a role in so many different ways in your life, but also you play a role in how your personality manifests. So that's why I say sometimes it's still about the choices that we make. And I think being conscious of the need to make choices sometimes is another challenge in and of itself. We've really kind of touched on a lot of really interesting things here. We've talked about the stress component, I think, which is huge. Greg, when we get back around to you, you might want to talk a little bit more about self-care and how you do it, but I want to just kind of touch real quickly on, one of the things that you all were saying is, why true resilience includes rest, vulnerability, and support, right? Those are three words that I'm throwing out there that most brothers rarely talk about. Rest, vulnerability, and support. Those three words are powerful. We're talking about the importance here of physical rest, of emotional rest, of, those, how beneficial those can be. We are the poster child of resilience, right? We have been for centuries, right? We some bounce backers, right? We bounce back from all kinds of mess. We have endured, centuries of hate. We have endured centuries of violence, but we still persevere. In the motherland, we have survived all kinds of attempts to take the land from us and destroy our people, but they keep fighting back and bouncing back. We are resilient. Rest is so important to resilience, right? You got to recharge your batteries, your physical batteries, your emotional batteries, your spiritual batteries. You have to rest. Vulnerability is something that I don't think most brothers think about, right, on a daily basis, other than maybe the notion that they have to be invulnerable. We have to, like I said, when we were young, we all thought we were immortal until the first thing that comes along that really, puts a dent in our armor. And then it's like, oh, wow, I'm not immortal. How am I going to deal with that emotionally? That's a tough one. But being vulnerable, what does that really mean? That means opening yourself up to others. That means opening yourself up to help. That means being honest with yourself and with others about you, right? I remember in recent years when I had to admit that I was vulnerable physically and needed support. You might remember this from some years back when I first learned I had frozen shoulder, the condition adhesive capsulitis, right? The shoulders would lock up, they would lose mobility, I would lose strength, I would have to go through periods of physical therapy. And at that time, because my shoulders were weak. That meant my arms were weak. That meant in my mind, I couldn't physically defend myself the way that I would normally feel like I could, which also meant I didn't feel like I could defend my wife the way that I needed to feel like I could. And so I remember for that period of time, and so I had to be honest with my wife. There were times when she wanted to go somewhere, go someplace, and it was just too many people. I didn't feel comfortable being there. You know, because my normal mode is if we're in a crowd and there's a lot of people, I'm making a hole. I'm making a way, me and the baby coming through back to F up, And I did not feel like I was able to do that, to function that way that in my mind as a man, I'm supposed to be able to do. That's part of my basic programming is I'm the protector or defender, right? And I'm a pretty big guy. So, I feel like I should be able to do certain things in certain situations. So that was a tough one for me. And so I had to be honest with her about that, No, I don't feel right about doing that here or there. And so, I feel great now. I've gotten that thing under control and many other things under control. And so, from that physical standpoint, but there was that need for support, that need to admit that I couldn't do what I normally could do or what I felt was my responsibility to do. And that I think goes to the heart of it for a lot of brothers, right? We have these notions in our mind of what we're supposed to be able to do or what we're required to do as men, what our roles might be, either defined by our families, defined by society, or defined by ourselves, to ourselves. But those responsibilities can weigh on us, can cause stress, can reveal these vulnerabilities and how we need to deal with them because of these notions of what we're supposed to do as a man.
That vulnerability question is a big one. That requires a level of openness that most of us are not sort of trained to do. We always have to be tough. We can't show emotion. We've got to be the
Think about
ones
when
that
you were a little boy, right? When a little boy falls down and scrapes his knee and he starts to cry, they say, "Shut up, don't cry.
walk it off.
You all right. You all
Walk
right."
walk
And
it
he's
off.
thinking to
And again,
himself, "What are
that's
y'all
not all
talking about?
bad.
That
Like,
hurts." Yeah, it's not all
but that
bad.
hasn't all but that's not all bad. There's a way in which I do
Hmm.
have a certain amount of inner strength that's based upon having scraped my knee sometimes or bumped my head a few
Yeah.
times. But
Hmm.
knowing the difference between something like that and knowing when you're actually hurt or harmed, acting accordingly.
They call it the Ballad of John Henry. He says, I'll die with a hammer in my hand, Lord, Lord. And then he dies from that point on. Brothers, that's what we've grown to live and feel and be, especially as black men, is that we got to keep it going, keep it strong, and no matter what until I die. And we got to get beyond that now, brothers. I think
Yep.
you said it, Rich. The vulnerability, the resilience, the wellness of it all is all a matter, and accountability of it all is all that's necessary. And I thank you, brothers, because I know that we practice that with each other. And I think and hope that through conversations, we encourage others to understand the importance of wellness and being vulnerable and that it's okay. There's nothing wrong with being vulnerable. It's a matter of showing that you're human, and that's what we are. We are human. We're not a machine, even though others may want to think of us as that. We aren't. We're human. We need to have the strength of others in order to keep going, and in some ways be the strength for others in order to help them keep going.
And let's toss out the fallacy of the American work ethic and get that mess off the board. This notion that you can work hard and all your dreams are gonna come
Mhm.
true. Now you can work hard and a lot of your dreams can come true, but it's usually not just because of your hard work that your dreams came true. And it's most definitely not because of your hard work alone. None of that pulling yourself up by the bootstraps mess, and we don't
Right.
allow those kind of lies to go on here. We
Right.
just gonna say that, we've got to this mindset, this notion that just this, I'm going to work myself to death just to succeed. Where's the success in that? Right? Okay. Now, if there's some success for your family, maybe, yeah, you might have, accumulated enough material wealth to set them up a little bit, but you're not here to take part in it. So, I don't know. We have to redefine success, maybe.
Yeah, but redefinition of success, redefinition of like what it means to take care of ourselves. And to me, I think part of our culture requires us to be in community with other people. And call them friends, call them family, but having that ability to share and interact culturally and so forth is a really critical piece of, at least for me. Some people like to be by themselves, but I have learned that a mixture of alone time and community helps create that balance for me.
Well, close us out, GK.
Well, I think this is a great subject that has so many different layers to it. I think in the United States, John Henryism sort of transcends race and culture, but I think we know now from the science and from brilliant people like Dr. James that there are particular elements of John Henryism that impact certain groups and black men in particular in a way that's different from other folks. And one other thing I would say, that's important, we also are learning more and more from the science that trauma and stress really is something that is passed through genetics, right? That in fact, trauma
Hmm.
is something that is often passed on from generation to generation. And so being aware of that is important too. I think it will help us improve things for the future for young folks so that they at least can be aware of those preconditions and then do the things necessary to sort of re-engineer ourselves against them. But structural racism, discrimination, pressure and stress of jobs and community really takes a toll on you. And I think we just have to be more intentional about taking care of ourselves, first of all, by being aware of the impact and then taking care of ourselves so that we can be full human beings for the people that rely on us.
Well said.
Excellent.
Well said.
So, have you guys out there listening, have you experienced this in your own lives? How do you handle it? We'd love to hear from you. Tell us what you think about the conversation today. Definitely are interested in your ideas about what you'd like to hear us talk about, what guests you might want us to bring on to engage in the conversation with us. But again, want to thank you all for your time with us today. This has been Raw and Refined, the Gentleman's Hour, and our hour is up.